In the quiet village of St. Aldwyn's, the crimson bell falls silent, and its keeper, Thomas Grieve, is found strangled in the church tower. Hercule Poirot, with his razor-sharp mind, unravels a web of vengeance and secrets. A priest hides a shameful debt, a seamstress nurses a bitter grudge, a charming visitor conceals a dubious past, and a forgotten exile returns to exact revenge. A muddy footprint, a red nail, a blue thread, and a mysterious key lead Poirot to a shocking truth, where silence speaks louder than the bell itself. Who killed Grieve and why? The answer lies in the shadows of the Crimson Bell. Chapter 1. The Silent Tower. The village of St. Aldwyn's lay cradled in the soft folds of Gloucestershire's hills, its stone cottages and winding lanes bathed in the amber light of an October dawn in 1928. At its heart stood St. Mary's Church, an ancient edifice of weathered limestone, its single tower piercing the mist like a steadfast guardian. Within that tower hung the Crimson Bell, so named for the curious reddish sheen its bronze surface cast when struck by the setting sun. For centuries its resonant chime had greeted each morning, a sound as familiar to the villagers as their own heartbeats. Yet on this particular morning an unnatural stillness hung over St. Aldwyn's. The bell was silent. Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective with his immaculate mustache and penchant for precision, had arrived in the village the previous evening to visit his friend Captain Arthur Hastings. Hastings, ever fond of the English countryside, was staying with his cousin Mrs. Eleanor Whitby, whose modest manor overlooked the village green. The two men had planned a quiet retreat, a respite from the clamor of London and Poirot's ceaseless cases. But as they walked along the cobbled path toward the village square, the absence of the bell's familiar toll halted Poirot in his tracks. He tilted his head, his green eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his perfectly brushed Homburg hat. "Mon ami," he said, his voice soft but laced with curiosity. "Do you not find it peculiar? A village church without its morning chime. It is as if the heart of St. Aldwyn's has ceased to beat. His gloved hand gestured toward the tower, its silhouette stark against the pale sky. Hastings, bundled in a tweed coat and scarf, frowned. "Perhaps the bell-ringer overslept," he suggested, his practical mind seeking the simplest explanation. "Or the ropes snapped. These old churches, you know, always something breaking down." Poirot's lips twitched in a faint smile, one that suggested indulgence rather than agreement. "No, Hastings. A bell does not fall silent without reason. The little gray cells, they tell me there is something amiss. We shall investigate, we." They reached St. Mary's just as a small crowd gathered at the church gate, their murmurs rising like the hum of bees. The villagers' faces, ruddy from the autumn chill, were etched with unease. Mrs. Whitby, a stout woman with a penchant for gossip, hurried toward them, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. "Oh, Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, it's dreadful," she exclaimed. "Thomas Grieve, the bell-ringer. He's been found dead in the tower, and the bell, it didn't ring at all." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest, though his expression remained composed. "Dead, you say? And the bell silent? This is most intriguing. Tell me, madam, who found the body?" "The sexton, Mr. Dobbs," she replied, her voice trembling. "He went up to check when the bell didn't sound." Poor man's shaken to his core, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami, Let us ascend this tower and see what secrets it holds." The church door creaked as they entered, the air inside heavy with the scent of wax and old stone. A narrow spiral staircase led to the bell chamber, its steps worn smooth by centuries of feet. At the top, they found Inspector Gresham, a burly man with a florid complexion and a mustache that rivaled Poirot's in size, if not in elegance. He stood beside the body of Thomas Grieve, a wiry man in his 50s slumped against the tower wall. A thin cord, not the bell rope, was knotted tightly around his neck, his face frozen in a grimace of shock. Above him the crimson bell hung motionless, its clapper tied back with a strip of coarse cloth. "Suicide plain as day," Gresham declared, his voice gruff. Grieve tied the noose, stopped the bell, and did himself in. Case closed. Poirot's eyebrows arched delicately as he knelt beside the body, his gloved fingers hovering over the cord without touching it. Suicide, Inspector. And yet the man takes the trouble to silence the bell before ending his life. Non, this is not logical. The mind of a man in despair does not pause for such theatrics. He rose, dusting his knees with a handkerchief. "This, I believe, is murder." Gresham snorted, but Hastings, accustomed to Poirot's methods, nodded thoughtfully. "What makes you so sure, Poirot?" he asked. Poirot gestured to the bell. "The clapper, Hastings. It was tied deliberately to prevent the chime. This was not the act of a man seeking to end his life, but of a killer who wished the silence to be noticed. A message, perhaps, or a symbol. We must discover its meaning." He turned his attention to the chamber, his movements precise and deliberate. The floor was dusted with fine dirt, and near the body a single muddy footprint caught his eye. He produced a small magnifying glass from his pocket and examined it closely. "A man's boot, I think," he murmured, "but not overly large. And here," he pointed to a tiny object caught in the cord's fibers, a broken fingernail painted a vivid red. "This suggests a woman's presence, does it not? Or perhaps a man with unusual tastes," Inspector Gresham scoffed. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill, Mr. Poirot. A footprint, a nail. Could be anyone's." Poirot's smile was polite but unyielding. "The little details, Inspector, they are the threads of truth. Ignore them and the tapestry unravels." He straightened, his gaze sweeping the chamber. "We must speak to those who knew Thomas Grieve. The priests, the villagers, any strangers in St. Aldwyn's. Someone, I think, had reason to silence both the man and his bell." As they descended the staircase, the villagers' whispers followed them, a chorus of fear and speculation. Poirot paused at the church door, his eyes fixed on the tower. "The crimson bell, Hastings," he said softly. "It has seen much in its long years. Today it will help us uncover a murderer." Chapter 2. The three suspects. The vestry of St. Mary's Church was a small, dimly lit room, its walls lined with oak panels worn smooth by the passage of time. A heavy table, scarred from years of use, stood at its center, surrounded by a handful of mismatched chairs. The air carried the faint scent of incense and polished wood, mingling with the chill that seeped through the stone walls. It was here, in this austere setting, that Hercule Poirot gathered the three individuals whose lives had intersected with the late Thomas Grieve, the bellringer whose lifeless body lay in the tower above, strangled by a cord and accompanied by the silent crimson bell. Poirot stood near the table, his small, neat figure immaculate in a tailored suit, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the dust of the church. His hands, gloved as always, rested lightly on the silver head of his walking stick, and his green eyes, sharp as a hawk's, surveyed the room with an air of quiet authority. Captain Hastings sat to his right, his notebook open, pencil poised, his honest face betraying a mixture of curiosity and unease. Inspector Gresham, the local policeman, stood by the door, his broad shoulders filling the frame, his expression one of barely concealed impatience. The inspector was a man of action, not deduction, and Poirot's presence, with its promise of meticulous inquiry, seemed to chafe him. The three suspects sat before them, each a study in contrast. Father Benedict, the priest of St. Mary's, was a tall, gaunt man in his late 40s, his black cassock hanging loosely on his frame. His face was pale, almost waxy, with deep-set eyes that darted nervously between Poirot and the floor. His hands, clasped tightly in his lap, twitched occasionally, as if resisting some inner turmoil. Beside him sat Margaret Cole, the village seamstress, a woman of middle age whose sharp features and pinched mouth suggested a life of disappointment. Her gray dress was neatly pressed, but her eyes burned with a defiance that bordered on hostility. At the end of the row was Leonard Vance, a visitor from London, an antiques dealer whose polished demeanor and tailored overcoat stood out starkly against the rustic simplicity of St. Aldwyn's. His smile was easy, his voice smooth, but there was a calculated precision in his movements that did not escape Poirot's notice. Poirot cleared his throat, a small, deliberate sound that commanded attention. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice soft but resonant. "We are gathered here to discuss a most tragic event, the murder of Thomas Grieve. It is my intention, with the aid of my friend Captain Hastings and the good Inspector Gresham, to uncover the truth. Each of you, I understand, had some connection to the deceased. It is from you that we shall begin to unravel this mystery." Inspector Gresham shifted his weight, his boots creaking on the stone floor. "Let's make this quick, Mr. Poirot," he said gruffly. "I've got a village in uproar and a coroner waiting." Grieve was strangled, likely by his own hand, though you seem to think otherwise. Let's hear what these folks have to say and be done with it. Poirot's lips curved in a faint, polite smile, but his eyes remained fixed on the suspects. "Patience, Inspector. The truth, it does not reveal itself to those who rush. Now let us proceed." He turned to Father Benedict, whose fingers tightened around each other. "Monsieur le Curé, you were the shepherd of this flock, oui? Thomas Grieve was your bellringer, a man devoted to his duty. Tell me, where were you at the hour of his death? Last night between 10 and midnight?" Father Benedict's eyes flickered, and he swallowed hard before speaking. "I was in the chapel, Mr. Poirot," he said, his voice low and strained. "I often pray there late at night. It is a time of quiet reflection, you understand." "I was alone, Poirot repeated, his tone neutral but probing. "And you heard nothing? No cries, no sounds from the tower above? The bell, it did not ring, and yet you were so close." The priest shook his head, his hands trembling slightly. "The chapel is at the far end of the church, sir. The walls are thick. I heard nothing until Mr. Dobbs came running to tell me of the tragedy." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And your relationship with Monsieur Grieve? It was harmonious?" Father Benedict hesitated, a shadow crossing his face. "Thomas was a good man, diligent in his duties. We had our disagreements, as all men do, but nothing serious. Disagreements? Poirot's eyebrows arched slightly. Of what nature, if I may ask? The priest's lips pressed into a thin line. Church matters. Nothing more. Poirot did not press further, but his eyes lingered on the priest's nervous hands before turning to Margaret Cole. Madame Cole, he said, his voice softening as if to coax her from her shell. You are a seamstress, a woman of skill and precision. Thomas Grieve, he was known to you, was he not? What was your acquaintance with him? Margaret's eyes narrowed, her posture stiffening. I knew him well enough, she said, her voice sharp as a needle. He was a busybody, always poking his nose where it didn't belong. Thought himself above the rest of us with his bell and his church duties. Poirot tilted his head, studying her. You did not like him, I think. There is a bitterness in your words. Why? Margaret's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. He spread lies about me years ago, she said, her voice rising. Said I stole from the church collection, though there was never proof. It cost me dearly, my good name, my prospects. I've not forgotten nor forgiven Hastings scribbled in his notebook, glancing at Poirot, who remained impassive. And last night, madame? Poirot asked. Where were you when Thomas Grieve met his end? At home, she snapped. Sewing, as always. I've no time for wandering about churches at night. Poirot's gaze flicked to her hands, noting the short, practical nails, one of which appeared freshly clipped. You paint your nails, madame? He asked lightly, almost as an afterthought. Margaret frowned, caught off guard. Sometimes. Red, if you must know. What's that got to do with anything? Poirot smiled enigmatically and turned to Leonard Vance, who had been watching the exchange with an air of detached amusement. Monsieur Vance, Poirot said, his tone shifting to one of polite curiosity. You are a stranger to St. Aldwyn's, yet you find yourself entangled in this affair. You are an antiques dealer, oui? What brought you to this quiet village? Vance leaned back in his chair, his smile as polished as his cufflinks. Business, mister. Poirot, he said smoothly. Saint. Mary's has a few relics worth appraising. A chalice, a candelabrum, some old manuscripts. I was invited by the church council to evaluate them. I arrived 2 days ago and was at the inn last night enjoying a pint with the locals. The innkeeper can confirm this? Poirot asked. Of course, Vance replied, his confidence unshaken. Ask old Mr. Harrow. He'll tell you I was there until well past midnight. Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on his stick. And your dealings with Thomas Grieve? You met him, I presume. Vance shrugged. Briefly. He showed me the church artifacts. Seemed a decent sort, if a bit overly proud of that bell of his. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. You admired the crimson bell, perhaps? It is a fine piece, non? Vance's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. It's old, certainly. Valuable, in its way. But I'm more interested in portable treasures, Mr. Poirot. Poirot stepped back, his gaze sweeping over the trio. Merci, mes amis, he said. You have given me much to consider. For now you may go, but I ask that you remain in St. Aldwyn's. The truth, it has a way of revealing itself, but it requires time. As the suspects filed out, Inspector Gresham crossed his arms, his face skeptical. Well, Mr. Poirot, what do you make of them? The priest's jumpy, the woman's got a temper, and the Londoner's too slick for my liking. But I still say Grieve did himself, and Poirot shook his head, his mustache twitching. No, Inspector, the cord, the silenced bell, the footprint, the nail, these are not the work of a suicide. Each of these three has a motive, a secret. Father Benedict hides something behind his piety. Madame Cole's anger burns deep, and Monsieur Vance, his charm is a mask. We must look closer. Hastings closed his notebook, his brow furrowed. You think one of them did it, Poirot? Or are you fishing for something else? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Fishing, Hastings? No, I am weaving. The threads are here. The grudge, the fear, the deception. But the pattern, it is not yet clear. We shall return to the tower, and then we shall visit the village. The truth lies in the details, and Poirot, he shall find them. They left the vestry, stepping into the churchyard where the autumn leaves rustled underfoot. The crimson bell loomed above, its silence a challenge to Poirot's relentless mind. As they walked toward the village, he murmured almost to himself, 3 suspects, 3 stories, but only one truth. The little gray cells, they are already at work. The village of St. Aldwyn's was stirring now, its inhabitants clustering in small groups, their voices hushed as they discussed the morning's grim discovery. Poirot and Hastings made their way to the inn where Mr. Harrow, the innkeeper, confirmed Vance's alibi with a nod. He was here, right enough, Harrow said, wiping a glass with a cloth. Drinking and chatting till late. Friendly chap, but kept to himself mostly. Poirot thanked him and turned to Hastings. An alibi, yes, but alibis can be arranged. We must learn more of Monsieur Vance's business here. And Madame Cole? Her grudge is old, but is it enough for murder? As for Father Benedict, his nervousness intrigues me. A priest should be calm in the face of death, non? They continued their inquiries, stopping at the village shop where the shopkeeper, Miss Tuttle, a wiry woman with a sharp memory, shared her observations. Margaret Cole's been sour since that business with Grieve years ago, she said. Lost her chance at marrying John Harrow, the innkeeper's son, after Grieve accused her of stealing. She's never been the same. And that Vance fellow, he was asking about the church's treasures, poking around where he shouldn't. And Father Benedict? Poirot prompted. Miss Tuttle lowered her voice. He's been odd lately. Locking the chapel early, keeping to himself. Some say he's worried about the church funds. Grieve was always watching the collection plate, you know. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. As they left the shop, Hastings glanced at Poirot. You're building quite a picture, old chap. But where does it lead? Poirot adjusted his hat, his expression serene but determined. To the truth, Hastings, always to the truth. We shall return to the tower tomorrow, and then we shall see what the crimson bell has to tell us. The sun was dipping below the hills, casting long shadows over St. Aldwyn's. The church stood silent, its tower a sentinel of secrets. Poirot paused, his gaze fixed on the crimson bell's faint outline against the fading light. A murder, Hastings, he said softly, is like a puzzle. Each piece must fit perfectly, or the picture is false. We shall find the pieces, and we shall make them fit with that. He turned and walked toward Mrs. Whitby's manor, his mind already piecing together the threads of motive, opportunity, and deceit. The crimson bell might be silent, but Hercule Poirot was listening. Chapter 3. The Bell Tower. The morning mist clung to the village of St. Aldwyn's, draping the church of St. Mary's in a ghostly veil as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings approached its ancient stone walls. The tower loomed above, its narrow windows like watchful eyes guarding the secrets of the crimson bell within. The previous day's interviews had left Poirot's mind buzzing with possibilities. But he knew the truth lay not only in the words of the living, but in the silent testimony of the crime scene itself. With his walking stick tapping rhythmically against the cobblestones, he led Hastings through the church's heavy oak door, his expression one of focused determination. "Mon ami," Poirot said, pausing at the foot of the spiral staircase that wound up to the bell chamber. "The tower, it is the heart of this mystery. The murder of Thomas Grieve was no act of impulse. It was planned, deliberate, and the crimson bell itself plays a role in the drama. We must listen to what it tells us." Hastings, adjusting his scarf against the chill of the church's interior, nodded but looked skeptical. "It's just a bell, Poirot. A big one, granted, but how can it tell us anything?" Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. "Ah, Hastings, you see, but you do not observe." The bell did not ring, and that silence is a voice. Why was it silenced? That is the question we must answer. The staircase was steep and narrow, its stone steps worn smooth by centuries of use. The air grew colder as they ascended, carrying the faint metallic tang of the bell above. At the top they emerged into the small circular chamber where Thomas Grieve's body had been found. The crimson bell dominated the space, its bronze surface gleaming dully in the light filtering through a single arched window. The rope that had strangled Grieve was gone, taken by Inspector Gresham's men for evidence, but the bell's thick rope hung limply, its end coiled on the floor. The clapper, still tied back with a strip of coarse cloth, dangled uselessly, ensuring the bell's silence. Poirot moved with the precision of a watchmaker, his gloved hands hovering over the scene without touching. He knelt near the spot where Grieve's body had lain, his magnifying glass catching the weak sunlight as he examined the stone floor. "Here, Hastings," he said, pointing to a faint smudge of dried mud. "The footprint we noted yesterday. It is a man's boot, but not overly large, perhaps a size 8 or 9. Not the heavy tread of a laborer, nor the fine sole of a gentleman like Monsieur Vance." Hastings peered over his shoulder. "Could it be the priest's?" "Father Benedict's a tall chap, but thin. Might fit." Poirot shook his head. "Possible, but unlikely. The priest's shoes, I observed, are worn and broad, suited for his duties. This print is narrower, more deliberate. We must find the boot that matches it." He rose and turned his attention to the bell. The cloth securing the clapper was a rough gray fabric, slightly frayed at the edges. Poirot untied it carefully, holding it up to the light. "This is not from the church," he murmured. "It is too coarse, too common. Perhaps from a sack or a curtain. We shall inquire in the village." Hastings frowned, scratching his head. "Why tie the clapper at all? If you're going to kill a man, why bother silencing the bell? Seems like extra work." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Précisément, Hastings. That is the brilliance of this crime. The silence of the crimson bell was not an afterthought. It was the purpose. The killer wished the village to notice, to feel the absence of the chime. It is a message, a symbol, but of what? Revenge? Defiance? We must understand the mind behind it." He moved to the coiled bell rope, examining its thick fibers. Near the base, he found a small snag, barely noticeable, where a thread of a different color, dark blue, had caught. "Interesting," he said, plucking it free with a pair of tweezers and placing it in a small envelope. "This is not from the rope. Perhaps from the killer's clothing? We shall see." His gaze then fell on a corner of the chamber where a small wooden box used to store cleaning rags and candles sat against the wall. Poirot opened it, revealing a jumble of items, a polishing cloth, a candle stub, and a small rusted key. He held the key up, turning it in the light. "Curious," he said. "This is not for the church doors. Too small, too ornate. Perhaps it belongs to a lock elsewhere, something Grieve kept hidden?" Hastings, growing impatient, gestured to the floor. "What about that nail you found yesterday? The red one caught in the cord? Surely that points to Margaret Cole." Poirot nodded, but his expression was cautious. "The nail, oui. It suggests a woman, and Madame Cole admits to using red polish. But we must not leap to conclusions. A nail can be planted or it can fall by chance. The footprint, the cloth, the thread. These are the pieces of the puzzle, and they must all fit." They descended the staircase, Poirot's mind clearly racing despite his measured pace. Outside, the churchyard was quiet, save for the rustle of leaves and the distant bleating of sheep. Poirot paused by the gate, his eyes scanning the village beyond. "We must learn more of Thomas Grieve," he said. "His life, his enemies, his secrets. The tower has given us clues, but the village will give us answers." Their next stop was the home of Mr. Dobbs, the sexton who had discovered Grieve's body. His cottage was a small, tidy affair at the edge of the churchyard, its garden neatly trimmed despite the autumn chill. Dobbs, a wiry man in his 60s with a face like weathered oak, welcomed them with a nod, though his eyes were wary. "You found Monsieur Grieve, I understand," Poirot said, settling into a worn armchair by the fire. "Tell me, what did you see?" Dobbs rubbed his hands together as if to warm them. "I went up at dawn when the bell didn't ring. Thought maybe the rope was tangled or Grieve was ill, found him there, slumped against the wall, that cord round his neck. Gave me a turn, it did. The bell was tied too, never seen that before." "You knew Grieve well?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but probing. "Well enough," Dobbs said. "He was a quiet sort, kept to himself mostly. Proud of that bell, though. Treated it like his own child. Had a sharp tongue when he wanted, mind you. Didn't make many friends." Poirot leaned forward. "Enemies, then? Someone who wished him harm?" Dobbs hesitated, glancing at the window as if expecting to be overheard. "He had words with a few folks. Margaret Cole, for one. She never forgave him for that theft business years back. And Father Benedict, well, they clashed over the church funds. Grieve thought the priest was too free with the collection plate. As for that London fellow Vance, I saw him and Grieve talking by the church a few days ago. Looked heated, but I couldn't hear what was said." Poirot's fingers tapped his stick. "And this key," he said, producing the rusted item from his pocket. "Have you seen it before?" Dobbs squinted at it, then shook his head. "Not one of ours, I'd say. Church keys are bigger, plainer. Might be Grieve's own, for something private." Poirot thanked him and rose, his mind clearly turning over the new information. As they stepped back into the crisp air, Hastings looked puzzled. "That key's a bit odd, isn't it? What could it be for?" "A lock, Hastings," Poirot said with a faint smile. But what it opens, that is the question. A box, a door, a secret. Grieve kept something hidden, I think. We must find it. They walked back toward the village, the tower casting a long shadow across the churchyard. Poirot paused, his gaze returning to the crimson bell's silhouette. "The tower has spoken, Hastings," he said softly. "The footprint points to a man, the nail to a woman, the cloth to a purpose, and the key to a secret. We are closer, but not yet there. Tomorrow we shall seek out the lives of our suspects, and the crimson bell will guide us to the truth." With that, he turned toward Mrs. Whitby's manor, his steps brisk, his mind a whirl of connections and possibilities. The mystery of the silent bell was deepening, but Hercule Poirot was undaunted, his little gray cells already weaving the threads of evidence into a pattern only he could see. Chapter 4. The Priest's Secret. The village of St. Aldwyn's wore its autumn hues with quiet dignity, the golden leaves drifting across the cobbled lanes as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings made their way to the village inn. The morning's investigation in the bell tower had sharpened Poirot's focus, his mind sifting through the clues: the muddy footprint, the coarse cloth, the dark blue thread, the rusted key, and the red-painted fingernail. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the human element, the motives and secrets of those closest to Thomas Grieve, beckoned for closer scrutiny. Poirot had decided to begin with Father Benedict, the priest whose nervous demeanor in the vestry had piqued his curiosity. The inn, a low-beamed building with ivy clinging to its stone walls, was a hub of village life, its taproom filled with the murmur of locals and the clink of glasses. Poirot, ever meticulous, had arranged to meet Father Benedict there, away from the somber confines of the church. "A man reveals more in a place of comfort, Hastings," he had explained earlier. "The vestry oppresses, the inn invites candor." They found the priest seated in a corner, his gaunt frame hunched over a cup of tea, his cassock replaced by a plain black coat that did little to soften his austere appearance. His deep-set eyes flicked up as Poirot and Hastings approached, and his hands, clasped around the cup, tightened imperceptibly. "Bonjour, Monsieur le Curé," Poirot said, his voice warm but precise as he settled into a chair opposite the priest. Hastings took a seat beside him, his notebook discreetly open. "It is kind of you to meet us here. The inn. It has a certain charm, does it not? A place where the tongue is loosened." Perhaps Father Benedict managed a thin smile, though his eyes remained guarded. "I come here occasionally, Mr. Poirot. The villagers are my flock, and I must meet your tea, Mr. Poirot," he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I was in the chapel, as I told you." Praying alone, Poirot nodded, his expression one of polite attentiveness. "Indeed, you did. A man of God, seeking solace in prayer, it is commendable. Yet I wonder what weighs so heavily on you that you seek such solitude at so late an hour." The priest's face paled and his fingers twitched, betraying a flicker of unease. I often pray at night," he said, his voice faltering. "It is my duty to reflect on the needs of the parish." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze as piercing as a lancet. "Duty, I understand. But Thomas Grieve, he was a trusted member of your parish, was he not? A man devoted to the Crimson Bell, to the church. You were fond of him, I presume." Father Benedict hesitated, his hands releasing the cup to clasp together in his lap. "Thomas was a good man," he said carefully. "He served Saint. Mary's faithfully for years. His work with the bell was exemplary. Yet, Poirot continued, his tone gentle but unrelenting, there were tensions between you, were there not? Disagreements, perhaps, over matters of the church? The priest's jaw tightened, and he looked down at his tea as if seeking answers in its amber depths. We had our differences, he admitted at last. Thomas was, particular about the church funds. He believed I was not managing them properly. He was mistaken, of course, but he was stubborn in his views. Poirot leaned forward, his mustache quivering slightly with interest. Mistaken, you say? And yet such accusations must have caused you distress. To be doubted by one of your own flock. It is a heavy burden for a man of your calling. Father Benedict's hands trembled, and he clasped them tighter to steady them. It was distressing, yes, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I assure you, Mr. Poirot, I have done nothing wrong. The funds are accounted for, every penny. I showed Thomas the ledgers myself, but he remained unconvinced. Poirot's expression remained serene, though his eyes gleamed with the intensity of a man who sensed a hidden truth. And yet you were alone in the chapel with no one to confirm your presence. A pity, Monsieur le Curé, for a man's word, even a priest's, requires corroboration in matters of murder. The priest's face drained of color, his eyes darting to the window as if longing for escape. I swear to you, Mr. Poirot, I was praying. I had no part in Thomas's death. Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on his walking stick. I do not accuse you, Father Benedict. I seek only the truth. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual that night? A sound, a shadow, perhaps someone near the church. Father Benedict shook his head, his voice firmer now. Nothing. The chapel is far from the tower and the walls are thick. I heard only the silence of the night. Poirot studied him for a moment longer, then rose, his movements graceful and deliberate. Merci, Father Benedict. You have been most helpful. We shall speak again, I think. As they stepped out into the crisp October air, Hastings closed his notebook with a frown. He's hiding something, Poirot, he said. Did you see how he fidgeted? Guilty as sin, if you ask me. Poirot's smile was enigmatic, his eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of St. Mary's Tower. Guilty, Hastings? Perhaps, but of what? His fear is real, but it is not the fear of a murderer, I think. It is the fear of a man with a secret. A secret he fears will be exposed. We must discover what it is. They walked toward the village green, the leaves crunching underfoot, the crimson bell's silence a lingering presence in Poirot's mind. Father Benedict's hands, they are not those of a strangler, he murmured almost to himself. And the footprint in the tower, it does not match his heavy practical shoes. Yet his alibi is weak and his distress is telling. We shall keep him in our thoughts, Hastings, as we turn to the others. The inn's warmth faded behind them, replaced by the chill of the autumn breeze and the weight of the mystery. The priest's secret, whatever it was but one thread in the tapestry of Thomas Greaves' murder. Poirot's little gray cells were already at work, weaving the clues together. The crimson bell's silence urging him onward. Chapter 5. The Seamstress's Grudge. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the village of St. Aldwyn's, its golden light filtering through the bare branches of the elms that line the narrow lane to Margaret Cole's cottage. Hercule Poirot, with Captain Hastings at his side, navigated the uneven path with his usual fastidious grace, his polished shoes avoiding the occasional puddle with practiced ease. The encounter with Father Benedict had left Poirot intrigued, the priest's nervous demeanor suggesting a secret yet to be uncovered. But now, his attention turned to the second suspect, Margaret Cole, the seamstress whose sharp tongue and bitter history with Thomas Grieve had marked her as a figure of interest in the murder of the bellringer. The cottage stood at the edge of the village, a modest structure with a sagging roof and a garden overrun with weeds. Its windows were small, their curtains drawn, giving the place an air of secrecy that matched its occupant's reputation. As Poirot knocked on the door, the sound echoed sharply in the quiet air, and after a moment the door creaked open to reveal Margaret Cole herself. Her gray dress was immaculate, her hair pulled tightly into a bun, but her face was a mask of defiance, her eyes narrowing at the sight of the diminutive detective and his companion. "Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice as sharp as the needle she wielded. "I suppose you're here about Thomas Grieve. I've nothing more to say than I did yesterday." Poirot's smile was disarming, his head tilting slightly as he removed his hat. "Madame Cole, your candor is refreshing, but I assure you a few moments of your time may illuminate much. May we enter?" Margaret hesitated, her lips pursing, but she stepped aside, gesturing them into a cramped parlor. The room was a chaos of fabric and thread, bolts of cloth stacked haphazardly on a table, a sewing machine humming faintly in the corner. A single armchair, its upholstery frayed, sat beside a small fireplace, and a shelf held a collection of thimbles and a bottle of vivid red nail polish, its cap slightly askew. Poirot's eyes lingered on the bottle, noting its color, a perfect match for the broken nail found in the bell tower. "Madame," Poirot began, settling carefully onto a wooden chair, his gloved hands resting on his walking stick, "you spoke yesterday of your dislike for Thomas Grieve. A man, you said, who spread lies about you, who cost you dearly. I wish to understand this history, if you please." Margaret stood by the fireplace, her arms crossed, her posture rigid. "There's no mystery to it," she snapped. 15 years ago, Grieve accused me of stealing from the church collection. Said he saw me take coins from the plate after a service. It was a lie, but the village believed him. My engagement to John Harrow, the innkeeper's son, fell apart. No one wants a thief for a wife, do they? I've been scraping by ever since, sewing for pennies while Grieve rang his precious bell like some saint. Poirot's expression remained serene, but his eyes were sharp, taking in every flicker of her face. "A grievous wrong, madam," he said softly. "To lose one's reputation, one's future, it is enough to kindle a deep resentment. Tell me, did this resentment ever lead you to the church, perhaps to confront Monsieur Grieve?" Margaret's eyes flashed, but she held his gaze. "I'm not a fool, Mr. Poirot. I kept my distance. I saw him at services, of course, but I didn't go near that tower. Why would I? To hear him gloat?" Hastings, seated with his notebook open, glanced at Poirot, his pencil pausing. "But you were out that night, weren't you?" he ventured. "Someone saw you leaving your cottage late, around the time Grieve was killed." Margaret's face tightened, her hands clenching into fists. "Who said that? Miss Tuttle, I'll wager, with her nose in everyone's business." "I stepped out to fetch thread from Mrs. Whitby's. My lamp was low and I needed to finish a dress." Nothing more. Poirot's gaze drifted to the nail polish bottle, then back to her hands. You paint your nails, madame, he said, his tone light, almost conversational. A striking red, oui. One of your nails, I notice, is freshly clipped. An accident, perhaps, while working with your threads. Margaret's hand twitched, and she tucked it behind her back. I broke a nail yesterday sewing. It's nothing unusual. You're fishing, Mr. Poirot, and you'll find no fish here. Poirot's smile was polite, but his eyes gleamed with interest. Fishing, madam. No, I am merely observing. A broken nail, a cord in the tower, a footprint that does not match your delicate shoes. These are details, and details tell a story. Where did you keep your sewing cord, if I may ask? Margaret's brow furrowed, suspicion creeping into her voice. In a basket by the machine. Why? And this basket, Poirot continued, gesturing to a wicker container overflowing with spools and scraps. It is accessible to others. A visitor perhaps might take a length of cord without your notice. She hesitated, her defiance wavering. I suppose so. I don't lock it away, but no one's been here except customers, and they don't rummage through my things. Poirot nodded, rising from his chair with a graceful motion. Merci, Madame Cole. You have been most forthcoming. We shall not trouble you further, for now. As they stepped out into the lane, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves, Hastings closed his notebook with a frown. She's got motive enough, Poirot, he said, that grudge against Grieve. It's been festering for years. And that nail polish matches the one in the tower. She could have slipped in, strangled him, and tied the bell to spite him. Poirot adjusted his hat, his eyes fixed on the distant church tower. Possible, Hastings, but not probable. The footprint in the tower, it is a man's, not hers. And the cord, it was thin, not the heavy thread of her sewing basket. No, Madame Cole is angry, yes, but anger alone does not make a murderer. The nail, it is a clue, but perhaps not to her guilt. It could have been placed or taken from here by another. Hastings looked puzzled. You think someone framed her? But who, and why? Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. That, mon ami, is what we must discover. The cord came from this cottage, I am certain, but not by her hand. Someone entered, took it, and used it to strangle Grieve. We must learn who visited Madame Cole in the days before the murder. They walked back toward the village, the Crimson Bell's silent presence a constant reminder of the task at hand. Poirot's mind was a whirl of connections. The priest's secret, the seamstress's grudge, the visitor's charm, and the clues in the tower. The truth, Hastings, he murmured. It hides in the shadows, but Poirot, he will bring it to the light. Chapter 6. The Visitor's Charm. The sun was dipping low over St. Aldwyn's, casting a warm amber glow across the village as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings approached the village inn. Its ivy-clad walls glowing softly in the late afternoon light. The investigation into Thomas Grieve's murder had taken them from the austere confines of the church to the cluttered chaos of Margaret Cole's cottage. Each encounter adding threads to the intricate tapestry Poirot was weaving in his mind. The muddy footprint, the coarse cloth, the dark blue thread, the rusted key, and the red-painted fingernail were all pieces of the puzzle. But the human element, the motives and secrets of the suspects, remained paramount. Now Poirot's attention turned to Leonard Vance, the polished antiques dealer from London, whose charm and elusive manner had piqued the detective's curiosity. The inn's tap room was a cozy haven, its low beams and crackling fire a stark contrast to the chill of the October evening outside. The scent of ale and freshly baked bread mingled with the faint smokiness of the hearth, and a few locals glanced up from their pints as Poirot and Hastings entered. Leonard Vance was seated at a small table near the window, a glass of whiskey in hand, his tailored overcoat draped over the chair beside him. His dark hair was impeccably combed, his smile easy and confident, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, betrayed a man accustomed to keeping his true thoughts hidden. "Bonjour, Monsieur Vance," Poirot said, his voice smooth as he approached, his walking stick tapping lightly on the wooden floor. "It is a pleasure to find you in such congenial surroundings. May we join you?" Vance gestured to the empty chairs with a flourish, his smile widening. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, do sit down. I'd offer you a drink, but I suspect you're here for something stronger than whiskey. Answers, perhaps." Poirot's mustache twitched with amusement as he settled into a chair, his gloved hands resting on his stick. Hastings sat beside him, his notebook at the ready, his expression one of cautious interest. "You are perceptive, Monsieur Vance," Poirot said. "Indeed, we seek answers about the tragic death of Thomas Grieve. You, as a visitor to St. Aldwyn's, bring a fresh perspective, no? Tell me, what brought you to this quiet village?" Vance leaned back, his fingers toying with the rim of his glass. "Business as I told you," he said, his tone light but measured. "The church council contacted me to appraise some artifacts, a silver chalice, a candelabrum, a few manuscripts. St. Mary's may be a humble parish, but it has treasures worth a pretty penny. I arrived 3 days ago to catalogue them." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "And Thomas Grieve, he assisted you in this task?" Vance nodded, his smile unwavering. "He did. Showed me the items, prattled on about that bell of his. Seemed to think it was the crown jewel of the church, though it's hardly portable. A bit obsessive, if you ask me, but harmless." "Harmless," Poirot repeated, his tone thoughtful. "Yet he is dead, strangled in his tower, and the crimson bell silent. You were at this inn the night of his death, oui? The innkeeper, Monsieur Harrow, confirms you were here until past midnight." "Exactly," Vance said, his voice smooth as silk. "I was enjoying a drink, chatting with the locals. No shortage of witnesses, Mr. Poirot. I'm afraid I'm not your man." Poirot's smile was polite, but his gaze was unrelenting, noting the polished tips of Vance's boots, their soles suspiciously clean for a man who had been wandering a muddy village. "Your boots, Monsieur Vance," he said almost casually. "They are most elegant. Recently cleaned, I observe. A necessity, perhaps, after walking near the churchyard." Vance's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. "I'm particular about my appearance, Mr. Poirot. Mud doesn't suit me. I polished them yesterday morning as it happens." Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on his stick. "Admirable, monsieur. A man of detail like myself. Tell me, did you ever visit the bell tower? Perhaps to admire the crimson bell which you say Monsieur Grieve valued so highly?" Vance shook his head, his expression one of mild amusement. "Not my style, I'm afraid. I prefer artifacts I can hold, not ones that weigh a ton. Grieve took me to the vestry to see the chalice and such, but the tower? No, I had no reason to go up there." Hastings, scribbling in his notebook, glanced up. "But you were seen near the church a few days ago, arguing with Grieve. Looked like a heated exchange, according to Mr. Dobbs Vance's eyes narrowed slightly, but his smile remained. Dobbs the sexton? He's got a vivid imagination. I wouldn't call it an argument. Grieve was protective of the church's treasures, thought I was undervaluing them. I explained my appraisal. He disagreed. Nothing more. Poirot tilted his head, his green eyes piercing. And what value did you place on these treasures, Monsieur Vance? Were they worth perhaps a risk? A man like you, accustomed to the finer things, might see opportunity in a village church. Vance laughed, a sound that was both charming and calculated. You're reaching, Mr. Poirot. I'm an antiques dealer, not a thief. My business is legitimate, and I've no interest in causing trouble in a place like this. Poirot's expression remained serene, but his mind was racing, noting the slight tension in Vance's shoulders, the way his fingers tightened around his glass. Of course, monsieur, he said. But the tower, it holds secrets. A footprint, a thread, a key. Small things, but they speak to Poirot. You are a man of precision, yet you were near the church, and your boots, they are too clean for a muddy path. Vance's smile tightened, but he said nothing, sipping his whiskey with studied nonchalance. Poirot rose, his movements graceful and deliberate. Merci, Monsieur Vance. You have given us much to consider. We shall meet again, I think. As they stepped out into the cooling evening, the village settling into the quiet of dusk, Hastings closed his notebook with a frown. He's slippery, Poirot, he said, that charm of his, it's like a mask. And those boots, clean as a whistle when everyone else in this village has mud on their heels. Poirot adjusted his hat, his eyes fixed on the silhouette of Saint Mary's tower against the fading sky. Oui, Hastings, a mask indeed. Monsieur Vance hides something behind his polish, perhaps a motive, perhaps a lie. His alibi is strong, but alibis can be arranged. We must learn more of his business with the church artifacts. Was there a disagreement with Grieve that went beyond appraisals? They began walking toward Mrs. Whitby's manor, the air crisp with the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. Poirot's mind was a whirl of connections. The priest's secret, the seamstress's grudge, and now the visitor's charm, each interwoven with the clues from the tower. The blue thread, Hastings, he murmured. It is not from the bell rope, nor from Madame Cole's cottage. Perhaps it comes from Monsieur Vance's fine coat. And the key, what does it unlock? We are close, mon ami, but the truth, it plays hide and seek. Hastings looked thoughtful. You think Vance is our man? He's got the cunning for it, I'll give you that. Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. Cunning, yes, but cunning alone does not make a murderer. We must follow the clues, not our suspicions. Tomorrow we shall seek the village's whispers, and the crimson bell will guide us closer to the truth. The inn's lights faded behind them, the village sinking into the stillness of night. The silent tower loomed in the distance, its secrets locked within, but Hercule Poirot, with his little gray cells, was determined to unlock them. Chapter 7. The Village Whispers. The morning in Saint Aldwyn's dawned crisp and clear, the autumn sun casting a soft golden light over the village where the leaves swirled gently in the breeze. Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings stood at the edge of the village green, the heart of St. Aldwyn's, where the weekly market was in full swing. Stalls laden with apples, fresh baked bread, and bundles of wool lined the square. and the air buzzed with the chatter of villagers, their voices a tapestry of gossip and speculation about the murder of Thomas Grieve. The Crimson Bell's silence hung over the scene like a shadow, its absence a constant reminder of the crime in the church tower. Poirot, immaculate in his tailored suit and Homburg hat, surveyed the bustling market with keen eyes, his walking stick tapping lightly against the cobblestones. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings, his voice low but vibrant with purpose, "the village, it is a living book, its pages filled with the stories of its people. Here in the whispers of the market we shall find the threads that connect our suspects to the murder of Monsieur Grieve. The footprint, the thread, the key, the nail, they are clues, oui, but the motives, they are written in the hearts of Saint." Aldwin's Hastings, clutching his notebook, looked around at the villagers, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. "You think the locals know more than they're letting on, Poirot. They're a tight-knit bunch, might not take kindly to us poking about." Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. "The tighter the knot, Hastings, the more it reveals when unraveled. Come, let us listen to the whispers they moved through the market." Poirot's small, precise steps contrasting with the bustling energy around him. Their first stop was the stall of Mrs. Agnes Tuttle, the sharp-eyed shopkeeper who had already proven herself a font of village lore. Her stall was piled high with jars of preserves and knitted scarves, and she greeted them with a knowing nod, her gray curls bobbing beneath a faded bonnet. "Good morning, Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice carrying a hint of satisfaction, as if she had expected their visit. "Come to pick through the village secrets, have you? Well, there's plenty to be had since poor Grieve met his end." Poirot inclined his head, his smile polite but probing. "Madame Tuttle, you are a woman of observation, a guardian of Saint. Aldwin's stories. Tell me, what do the villagers say of Thomas Grieve and those who knew him? Father Benedict, Madame Cole, Monsieur Vance. There are tensions, no?" Mrs. Tuttle's eyes gleamed with the relish of a born gossip. "Oh, aye, tensions aplenty. Grieve wasn't one to make friends, you know. Always watching, always judging. He and Father Benedict were at odds over the church funds. Grieve swore the priest was dipping into the collection plate, though Father Benedict showed him the books. Didn't satisfy Grieve, mind you. He was stubborn as a mule. Poirot's fingers tapped his stick lightly. And this disagreement, it was known in the village? Known? Mrs. Tuttle snorted. It was the talk of the parish. Grieve wasn't quiet about it, hinted to anyone who'd listened that Father Benedict wasn't to be trusted. Made the poor man's life a misery. It did, Hastings scribbled in his notebook, glancing at Poirot. Sounds like a motive to me, he murmured. Poirot's eyes remained fixed on Mrs. Tuttle. And Madame Cole? Her history with Grieve is no secret, I think. Mrs. Tuttle's lips pursed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Margaret Coles carried that grudge like a stone in her heart. Grieve's accusation, calling her a thief all those years ago, ruined her chance with John Harrow. She's been bitter ever since, snapping at anyone who mentions Grieve's name. I saw her myself 2 nights back, slipping out of her cottage after dark. Said she was fetching thread, but who sews at that hour? Poirot's eyebrows arched slightly. After dark, you say? Near the time of the murder? Aye, Mrs. Tuttle said, nodding vigorously. I was closing up my shop, saw her heading toward the manor. Didn't think much of it then, but now... Well, it's queer, isn't it? Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the detail. And Monsieur Vance, the visitor from London? What does the village say of him? Mrs. Tuttle's expression turned wary. That one's a smooth talker, mister. Poirot came to appraise the church relics, but some say he's got an eye for more than candlesticks. I heard he and Grieve had words a few days ago out by the churchyard. Grieve thought Vance was lowballing the value of the chalice, called him a swindler, loud enough for Mr. Dobbs to hear. Vance just laughed it off, but there was a look in his eye, sharp as a knife. Poirot's gaze sharpened. A swindler, you say? Interesting. And where was Monsieur Vance that night? At the inn, so he claims, Mrs. Tuttle said, shrugging. Harrow says he was there drinking till late, but I saw him near the church earlier that evening, just before dusk. He was pacing by the gate, looking like a man with something on his mind. Poirot thanked her, his mind already turning over the new information. They moved on, weaving through the market, pausing to speak with other villagers. The baker, Mr. Pritchard, confirmed the tension between Grieve and Father Benedict, adding that the priest had taken to locking the chapel early in recent weeks, a habit unusual for a man so devoted to his flock. The blacksmith, a burly man named Mr. Stokes, spoke of Margaret Cole's bitterness, noting she had once thrown a spool of thread at Grieve during a church fair, her temper flaring for all to see. As for Vance, the villagers were divided. Some found his charm disarming, others distrusted his city manners and whispered of shady dealings in London. At the edge of the market, Poirot paused by a stall selling apples, his eyes scanning the crowd. The village speaks, Hastings, he said softly. Each whisper adds a brushstroke to the picture. Father Benedict, he locks the chapel, hiding something. Madame Cole, she moves in the night, her grudge a fire that burns still. Monsieur Vance, he paces near the church, his charm a veil for something darker. But the clues, the footprint, the thread, the key, they point beyond these three, I think. Hastings frowned, flipping through his notebook. Beyond them? You mean there's another suspect? But who? Everyone points to these three. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The little gray cells. They are restless, Hastings. The footprint is a man's, yet none of our suspects' shoes match perfectly. The thread, it is blue, not from Madame Cole's cottage, nor Vance's coat. The key, what does it unlock? And the nail, it is Madame Cole's, but perhaps not by her hand. We must look deeper into the shadows of St. Aldwyn's. They turned back toward the church, its tower a silent sentinel against the sky. Poirot's gaze lingered on the crimson bell's faint outline, his mind weaving the village's whispers with the tower's clues. The market has spoken, mon ami, he said. Now we must return to the tower to test these threads against the truth. The crimson bell, it waits to reveal its secret. As they walked, the village's chatter faded behind them, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the distant bleating of sheep. Poirot's steps were brisk, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. The whispers of St. Aldwyn's had given him much, but the silent bell held the key to the murderer's heart, and Hercule Poirot was determined to hear its voice. Chapter 8. The Red Nail. The late afternoon light filtered through the narrow windows of St. Mary's Church, casting long, slanted beams across the stone floor as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings ascended the spiral staircase to the bell tower once more. The market's whispers had enriched Poirot's understanding of the tension swirling around Thomas Greaves' murder, but the physical clues, the muddy footprint, the coarse cloth, the dark blue thread, the rusted key, and the red-painted fingernail remained the anchors of his investigation. The Crimson Bell, silent since the night of the crime, seemed to loom larger with each visit, its bronze surface a mute witness to the tragedy. Poirot's mind, ever restless, sought to align the village's gossip with the tower's evidence, and he was determined to extract every secret the chamber held. "Mon ami," Poirot said, pausing halfway up the staircase, his gloved hand resting lightly on the cold stone wall. "The tower, it is like the heart of this mystery. Each clue we find here is a beat, a pulse, leading us to the truth. The red nail in particular, it points to Madame Cole, yet I suspect it tells a story more complex than her guilt." Hastings, puffing slightly from the climb, adjusted his hat. "It's a strong clue, Poirot. That nail polish was hers, no question. And her grudge against Greaves, well, it's enough to make anyone suspicious. But you're right about the footprint. It doesn't fit her, does it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Précisément, Hastings. The nail suggests her presence, but the footprint contradicts it. We must examine the cord again, for it holds the nail and perhaps more." They reached the bell chamber where the crimson bell hung, its clapper still freed from the coarse cloth Poirot had removed the previous day. The chamber was as they had left it, the air heavy with the scent of metal and dust. The spot where Greaves' body had lain was marked only by a faint chalk outline, drawn by Inspector Gresham's men. Poirot knelt beside it, his magnifying glass catching the fading light as he studied the floor anew. The muddy footprint, though slightly smudged by the comings and goings of the police, remained distinct. A man's boot, size 8 or 9, narrower than expected for a laborer. "This footprint," Poirot murmured, tracing its outline with his finger. "It is deliberate, not careless." The killer stood here, perhaps watching Greaves as he struggled. But whose boot fits this mark? Not Father Benedict's heavy shoes, nor Monsieur Vance's polished ones, nor Madame Cole's small feet. He turned his attention to the bell rope, coiled neatly now, but still bearing the snag where the dark blue thread had been found. Poirot produced the small envelope containing the thread, holding it up to compare. "This thread," he said, "it is wool, not cotton, and its color is deep like the midnight sky. It does not match the fabrics in Madame Cole's cottage, nor the fine weave of Monsieur Vance's coat. We must find its source." Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, pointed to the wooden box in the corner where the rusted key had been discovered. "What about that key?" "You've been awfully quiet about it, Poirot. Think it's important?" Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. "The key, Hastings. It is a mystery within a mystery. Too small for the church doors, too ornate for a simple lock. It suggests something private, something Greaves kept hidden. We shall seek its lock, but first, the cord." He moved to the vestry where Inspector Gresham had stored the thin cord used to strangle Greaves, now sealed in a paper evidence bag. Poirot, with permission, opened the bag and examined the cord under his magnifying glass. The red nail, still caught in its fibers, gleamed like a drop of blood. "This nail," he said, It is indeed Madame Cole's, or from her Polish. But observe, it is not broken raggedly as if torn in a struggle. It is clipped, clean. A curious detail, no? Hastings frowned, scratching his head. Clipped? You mean she didn't break it fighting with Grieve? Exactly, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. It suggests the nail was placed, perhaps taken from her cottage and caught in the cord deliberately. A clue to mislead us? Or an accident of opportunity? We must know more. They descended to the churchyard where the sexton, Mr. Dobbs, was raking leaves, his weathered face creased with worry. Poirot approached him, his manner genial but purposeful. Monsieur Dobbs, a moment, if you please. You have been most helpful, but I must ask, did you ever see visitors to Madame Cole's cottage in the days before the murder? Someone who might have taken a cord from her basket? Dobbs leaned on his rake, his eyes narrowing in thought. Well, now you mention it, I did see someone odd. 2 days before Grieve was killed, I was passing by her cottage on my way to the church. Saw a man leaving late in the evening. Didn't get a good look, too dark, but he was slim, not too tall. Moved quick like he didn't want to be seen. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Slim, you say? Like Monsieur Vance, perhaps? Dobbs shrugged. Could be. His build maybe, but I can't swear to it. Didn't see his face. And Madame Cole herself? Poirot pressed. You mentioned seeing her arguing with Monsieur Vance near the church. What was the nature of their dispute? Dobbs scratched his chin. Heard bits of it, not all. Something about a debt, I think. Vance was saying she owed him for some trinket he'd sold her years back. She was spitting mad, called him a cheat. Didn't sound like a friendly chat. Poirot thanked him, his mind racing as they walked back toward the village. A debt, Hastings, he said softly. Madame Cole and Monsieur Vance connected by more than chance. And this mysterious visitor to her cottage, could it be Vance or another? The cord, the nail, they came from her home, yet the footprint tells us a man was in the tower. Hastings flipped through his notebook, his brow furrowed. You're thinking someone took the cord from her cottage to frame her. But why? And who's this slim fellow Dobbs saw? Poirot's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. The little gray cells, they are working, Hastings. The nail points to Madame Cole, but the footprint points away. The thread, the key, they point to someone else. Someone who moves in the shadows of St. Aldwyn's. We must find this visitor, and we must find what the key unlocks. As they reached the village green, the Crimson Bells Tower stood stark against the deepening sky, its silence a challenge to Poirot's relentless mind. The red nail, Hastings, he murmured. It is a clue, but not the whole story. The Crimson Bell knows the truth, and Poirot, he will make it speak. Chapter 9. The Confrontation. The vestry of St. Mary's Church, with its ancient oak panels and flickering candlelight, was steeped in an air of solemnity as Hercule Poirot gathered the three suspects, Father Benedict, Margaret Cole, and Leonard Vance, for a confrontation. The late afternoon shadows stretched long across the stone floor, mirroring the tension that hung in the room. The murder of Thomas Grieve, the bellringer, and the eerie silence of the Crimson Bell had cast a pall over St. Aldwyn's, and Poirot, with his meticulous mind and unyielding pursuit of truth, was determined to unravel the mystery. Captain Hastings sat beside him, his notebook open, his pencil poised to capture every word, while Inspector Gresham leaned against the door frame, his arms crossed, his skepticism barely concealed. Poirot stood at the head of the heavy table, his small, immaculate figure commanding the room with quiet authority. His gloved hands rested lightly on his walking stick, and his green eyes, sharp as cut glass, moved from one suspect to another, reading their faces as if they were pages in a book. Father Benedict sat rigidly, his gaunt face pale, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. Margaret Cole, her lips pursed in defiance, glared at the table, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her gray dress. Leonard Vance, ever the polished gentleman, lounged in his chair, his smile easy but his eyes wary like a cat watching a circling hawk. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice soft but resonant, cutting through the stillness like a bell's chime. We are gathered here to discuss the murder of Thomas Grieve, a man whose life was ended by a cord around his neck and whose beloved Crimson Bell was silenced, a deliberate act, a message. I, Hercule Poirot, have examined the clues, the footprint, the thread, the key, the nail, and I have listened to the whispers of St. Aldwyn's. Each of you had reason to wish Grieve harm, and today we shall uncover the truth. Inspector Gresham shifted, his boots creaking. Get on with it, Mr. Poirot, he said gruffly. I've got a report to file, and this lot's already told us where they were. Suicide's still my bet, but let's hear your theory. Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile, but his eyes remained fixed on the suspects. Non, Inspector, this was no suicide. The cord, it was not the bell rope, but a thinner one, taken from Madame Cole's cottage. The clapper of the bell was tied with a coarse cloth, ensuring silence, a symbol perhaps of the killer's intent. The footprint, it is a man's, size 8 or 9, narrow and deliberate. The thread, dark blue woolen, snagged on the bell rope. The key, small and ornate, hidden in a box, and the nail, red, caught in the cord. These are the threads of our tapestry, and they weave a tale of murder. He turned to Margaret Cole, his gaze piercing but polite. Madame Cole, your anger toward Monsieur Grieve is well known. He accused you of theft years ago, costing you your engagement, your reputation. The nail, painted red, matches the polish in your cottage. You were seen leaving your home the night of the murder, yet you claim you were fetching thread. A compelling case, non? Margaret's eyes flashed, her voice sharp as a blade. I told you I didn't go near the church. Yes, I hated Grieve. Who wouldn't after what he did? But I didn't kill him. That nail could have come from anywhere. I don't lock my door. Anyone could have taken it. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Indeed, madam, the nail is yours, but the footprint is not. Your shoes are small, delicate. The killer's boot is a man's. This suggests perhaps that you are not the murderer, but someone used your cord, your nail, to point suspicion at you. He turned to Leonard Vance, whose smile remained fixed, though his fingers tightened around the arm of his chair. Monsieur Vance, you are a man of charm, of precision. Your boots, they are polished, too clean for the muddy paths of St. Aldwyn's. You were seen near the church before the murder, arguing with Grieve over the value of the church's relics. A debt, perhaps, or a disagreement. And yet you claim to have been at the inn with witnesses. A perfect alibi, oui. Vance's laugh was light, but it lacked warmth. Perfect because it's true, Mr. Poirot. I was at the inn, as Harrow will tell you. As for Grieve, we had a professional disagreement, nothing more. I'm no killer. I deal in antiques, not death. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Yet the footprint, Monsieur Vance, it is close to your size, though your boots are too clean. And the thread dark blue, it does not match your fine gray coat, but perhaps another garment? You are a man who covers his tracks, I think. Finally, Poirot turned to Father Benedict, whose hands trembled visibly now. Monsieur le Curé, your alibi is the weakest of all, alone in the chapel with no one to confirm your presence. Grieve accused you of mismanaging church funds, a charge that struck at your honor. You locked the chapel early, an unusual act for a priest. What do you hide, I wonder? Father Benedict's voice was strained, his eyes darting to the floor. I've told you, Mr. Poirot, I was praying. Yes, Thomas and I disagreed, but I would never harm him. I am a man of God. Poirot paced slowly before them, his stick tapping rhythmically. 3 suspects, 3 motives. Madame Cole's grudge, Monsieur Vance's dispute, Father Benedict's secret. Yet the footprint, it belongs to none of you, or so it seems. The nail points to Madame Cole, but the cord was taken perhaps by another. The thread, the key, they hint at a presence we have not yet named. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. The crimson bell, it was silenced for a reason, not merely to conceal the crime, but to proclaim it. The killer wanted the village to know, to feel the absence of the chime. This is a crime of passion, of purpose, and Poirot, he will find the one who wove this web. The suspects exchanged glances, their faces a mix of fear, defiance, and unease. Margaret's hands clenched, Vance's smile tightened, and Father Benedict's lips moved silently as if in prayer. Hastings leaned forward, whispering, "You're rattling them, Poirot." "But do you know who did it?" Poirot's eyes twinkled, but he kept his voice low. "Not yet, Hastings, but the little gray cells, they are close. We must find the owner of the footprint, the source of the thread, the lock for the key. The truth, it is near." As the suspects were dismissed, Poirot lingered in the vestry, his gaze fixed on the candlelit crucifix above the table. "The confrontation, Hastings," he said softly. "It has stirred the waters. Now we shall see what rises to the surface. The crimson bell will speak, and the murderer will be revealed." Chapter 10. The Hidden Truth. The twilight air in Saint. Aldwin's was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and wood smoke as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings walked away from the vestry of St. Mary's Church. The confrontation with Father Benedict, Margaret Cole, and Leonard Vance had stirred the undercurrents of suspicion. But Poirot's mind was restless. The clues from the bell tower, the muddy footprint, the dark blue thread, the rusted key, the red nail, and the coarse cloth, still weaving an incomplete pattern. The crimson bell's silence was a persistent challenge, urging Poirot to look beyond the obvious suspects to the shadows of the village. His little gray cells, ever active, sensed a hidden figure, a fourth player in this deadly drama. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low as they crossed the village green, the church tower looming behind them. "The confrontation, it has revealed much, but not all. The footprint, it does not match our suspects' shoes. The thread, it is not from their garments. The nail, it points to Madame Cole, yet the cord was taken by another. The key, what does it unlock? There is someone else, Hastings, someone who moves unseen in Saint." Aldwin's Hastings, clutching his notebook, frowned in the dimming light. "Another suspect? But who, Poirot? We've spoken to everyone close to Grieve. The village isn't that big. Surely someone would have noticed a stranger skulking about. Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. Not a stranger, perhaps, but one who has been forgotten or overlooked. The little gray cells, they whisper of a name we have not yet considered. We must return to the clues and to the village's memory. Their first stop was the home of Mrs. Whitby, Hastings' cousin, whose manor overlooked the green. A stout woman with a penchant for village lore, she welcomed them into her parlor where a fire crackled warmly. Poirot, declining a proffered sherry, leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Madame Whitby, you know the history of St. Aldwyn's. Tell me, was there anyone else, perhaps long ago, who bore a grudge against Thomas Grieve? Someone who might have returned, unseen?" Mrs. Whitby's brow furrowed, her hands smoothing her apron as she thought. "Well, there's Margaret Cole, of course, but you know about her. Grieve's accusation ruined her engagement, but now you mention it, there was her brother, Samuel Cole. A quiet lad, worked as a carpenter until Grieve accused him of stealing tools from the church shed about the same time as Margaret's trouble. Samuel left the village after that. Couldn't bear the shame. Haven't heard of him in years." Poirot's eyes gleamed, his fingers tapping his walking stick. "Samuel Cole, you say? A man driven from his home by Grieve's accusations? And his build, madam? Was he a large man or small?" Mrs. Whitby tilted her head. "Slim, not too tall. Had a quick way about him, always moving. Wore those old work boots, size 8 or so, I'd wager." Hastings' eyes widened, and he glanced at Poirot. "The footprint, Poirot. It could be his." Poirot nodded, his expression serene but intense. "Merci, Madame Whitby. You have given us a name and perhaps a key to our mystery. Tell me, has anyone seen this Samuel Cole in St. Aldwyn's recently?" She shook her head. "Not that I know of. But folk come and go quietly sometimes. He'd know the village paths, could slip in without much notice." Poirot rose, his mind racing. "We must find this Samuel Cole, Hastings. If he has returned, he may be the shadow we seek." Their next move was to revisit Mr. Dobbs, the sexton, whose cottage bordered the churchyard. They found him tending a small vegetable patch, his hands caked with earth. Poirot, careful to avoid the mud, greeted him with his usual courtesy. "Monsieur Dobbs, a question, if you please. You spoke of a slim man leaving Madame Cole's cottage 2 days before the murder. Could this have been her brother, Samuel Cole, returned to the village?" Dobbs paused, his rake still in hand, his weathered face creasing in thought. "Samuel, eh? Hadn't thought of him in years. Could have been, I suppose. The build fits. Slim, quick. Didn't see his face, mind you, but he moved like someone who knew the place." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And the boots, Monsieur Dobbs. Did you notice them?" Dobbs scratched his chin. "Can't say for certain, but they weren't fancy. Work boots, maybe, like Samuel used to wear. Saw a pair like that tossed in a ditch near the church lane yesterday, come to think of it. Didn't touch 'em, though." Poirot's heart quickened, though his face remained composed. "A ditch, you say? Show us, if you please." Dobbs led them to a narrow lane behind the church where a shallow ditch ran alongside a hedge. There, half buried in leaves, was a pair of worn work boots, size 8 or 9, their soles caked with dried mud. Poirot knelt, his magnifying glass gleaming as he examined them. "The tread, Hastings," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "It matches the footprint in the tower. These boots, they walked where Grieve died." Hastings' jaw dropped. Samuel Cole. He's our man, then? Poirot rose, dusting his gloves with a handkerchief. Perhaps, mon ami, but we must be certain. The boots, they are a clue, but we need the man. We shall inquire at the inn, the station, anywhere a returning son might pass. Their inquiries at the inn yielded little. Mr. Harrow had seen no strangers matching Samuel's description. But a visit to the village station proved more fruitful. The station master, a wiry man with a ledger full of comings and goings, recalled a passenger arriving 3 days before the murder. Slim fellow, quiet, kept his hat low, he said. Bought a return ticket to Gloucester but didn't use it. Said he was visiting family. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And his name, monsieur? Didn't give one, the station master said. Paid in cash. Kept to himself. Armed with this lead, Poirot and Hastings returned to the village, where Poirot's relentless logic began to weave the clues together. Samuel Cole, he murmured, pausing by the church gate, the tower's silhouette stark against the twilight sky. A man driven from his home by Greaves' accusations, like his sister. He returns unseen, takes a cord from Margaret's cottage, perhaps her nail as well. He strangles Greaves, ties the bell's clapper to mark his revenge. The silence, it is his triumph. The thread, the key, they must connect to him. Hastings flipped through his notebook, his brow furrowed. But the thread, Poirot, the blue wool. And the key? How do they fit? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The thread, it may be from a garment he wore. A scarf, a jacket, something common in this village. The key, it is still a mystery, but I suspect it unlocks something Greaves kept hidden, something Samuel knew of. We must find him, Hastings, and quickly. A tip from a villager led them to a neighboring town where Samuel Cole was found hiding in a run-down boarding house. Poirot, with Inspector Gresham's assistance, confronted him in a cramped room, his slim frame and haunted eyes matching Mrs. Whitby's description. Under Poirot's piercing gaze, Samuel's defiance crumbled. Greaves ruined me, he confessed, his voice hollow. Called me a thief, drove me from my home, my sister's life ruined too. I came back to settle it, took the cord from Margaret's basket, she didn't know. Strangled him, tied the bell, wanted the village to feel his absence like I felt mine. Poirot nodded, his expression solemn. And the nail, Monsieur Cole? The thread, the key? Samuel's eyes flickered. The nail was Margaret's, must have caught when I took the cord. Didn't mean to leave it. The thread, my old scarf, snagged on the rope. The key. I don't know about no key. Poirot's mind seized on the confession, but the key remained a loose thread. You have spoken the truth, monsieur, he said. But the key, it will tell its own story in time. As Samuel was led away, Poirot stood in the boarding-house doorway, the weight of the truth settling around him. The hidden truth, Hastings, he said softly. It emerges from the shadows. Samuel Cole is our murderer, but the key, it whispers of another secret, one we have yet to uncover. The Crimson Bell's silence echoed in his mind, its mystery not yet fully resolved. But Poirot's little gray cells were undaunted, ready to chase the final piece of the puzzle. Chapter 11. The Confession. The air in the cramped room of the boarding house in the neighboring town of Winbury was thick with the scent of stale tobacco and damp wool, a stark contrast to the crisp autumn freshness of St. Aldwyn's. Hercule Poirot stood near the window, his small, impeccable figure silhouetted against the fading twilight, his green eyes fixed on Samuel Cole. the man whose confession had just unraveled the mystery of Thomas Greaves' murder. Captain Hastings stood by the door, his notebook open, his face a mixture of triumph and unease as Inspector Gresham, broad and imposing, loomed over the suspect. Samuel, a slim man with weathered features and haunted eyes, sat hunched on a sagging chair, his hands trembling as he faced the consequences of his admission. Poirot's voice, when he spoke, was calm but carried the weight of inevitability. "Monsieur Cole, you have told us a tale of vengeance, of a wrong that festered for 15 years. Thomas Greaves, with his accusations, drove you from St. Aldwyn's, destroyed your life and that of your sister, Madame Margaret Cole. You returned, you say, to settle this debt. You took the cord from her cottage, strangled Greaves, and tied the clapper of the Crimson Bell to mark your triumph. Is this correct?" Samuel's head bowed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Aye, it's true. Greaves called me a thief, said I stole tools from the church shed. Never proved it, but the village turned on me. I lost my work, my home. Had to leave Margaret behind, struggling. She lost her chance with John Harrow because of Greaves' lies. When I heard he was still lording it over the village, ringing that bell like some saint, I couldn't stand it. I came back 3 days ago, stayed out of sight. Took the cord from Margaret's basket when she was out. She didn't know. I waited in the tower, caught him alone, and I did it." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his fingers resting lightly on his walking stick. "And the bell, Monsieur Cole? Why silence the Crimson Bell? It was not enough to kill him?" Samuel's gaze flickered, a spark of defiance in his eyes. That bell was his pride, his glory. Every morning it rang out, telling the village he was still there, still judging us. I tied the clapper so they'd know he was gone, so the silence would scream what I'd done. I wanted them to feel it like I felt my exile. Hastings, scribbling furiously, glanced at Poirot. "That explains the cloth, Poirot. The coarse stuff you found must have been from a sack or something he had on him." Poirot nodded, but his expression remained intent. "Oui, Hastings, the cloth fits his story, and the nail, Monsieur Cole. The red nail caught in the cord, how did it come to be there?" Samuel's brow furrowed, his hands clenching. "Must have been Margaret's. She keeps that polish by her sewing table. I grabbed the cord quick, didn't notice no nail, it wasn't meant to be there." Poirot's mustache twitched, his mind seizing on the detail. "An accident, then, but one that pointed to your sister. And the thread, dark blue woolen, snagged on the bell rope? You said it was from your scarf." Samuel nodded, pulling a worn scarf from his pocket, its deep blue weave frayed at the edges. "This old thing? Wore it that night to keep the chill off. Must have caught when I was tying the rope." Inspector Gresham, who had been silent, stepped forward, his voice gruff. "That's enough for me, Mr. Poirot. He's confessed clear as day. I'll take him in, and we'll have this wrapped up by morning." But Poirot raised a hand, his gaze still fixed on Samuel. "One moment, Inspector. There is still the key, the small ornate key found in the box in the tower. You say you know nothing of it?" Samuel's eyes widened, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Key? I don't know about any key. I didn't touch no box, just did what I came to do and left." Poirot's expression was unreadable, but his mind was racing. "Very well, Monsieur Cole. Your confession, it is complete, and Poirot, he believes you speak the truth. But the key, it suggests another layer to this tragedy, one we have not yet uncovered. As Gresham led Samuel away, his wrists bound, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. The confession, it ties the threads, the cord, the nail, the cloth, the thread. But the key, Hastings, it is a loose end. It does not belong to the church nor to Greaves' home, I suspect. It is a secret, perhaps one Grieve kept or one another sought. They returned to St. Aldwyn's under a starlit sky, the village quiet save for the distant bark of a dog. At Mrs. Whitby's manor, Poirot requested a meeting with Margaret Cole, who arrived pale and shaken, her eyes red from weeping. In the parlor, lit by the soft glow of a lamp, Poirot spoke gently but firmly. Madame Cole, your brother has confessed to the murder of Thomas Grieve. He took the cord from your cottage, and the nail, it was yours, caught by chance. Did you know of his return, his plan? Margaret's hands trembled, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, Mr. Poirot, I swear I didn't. Samuel left years ago. I thought he was gone for good. He must have come to my cottage when I was out. I'd never have helped him do that. Poirot nodded, his gaze softening. I believe you, madam. Your anger was great, but it was not you who acted. The nail, it was a cruel twist of fate pointing to you, and your brother was the culprit. He turned to the inn next, where Leonard Vance was sipping a whiskey, his composure restored but his eyes wary. Poirot's questions were brief, but pointed. Monsieur Vance, your dispute with Grieve, it was over the church relics, oui? But was there more? A debt, perhaps, with Madame Cole, as the village whispers? Vance's smile was tight. A minor transaction years ago. I sold her a trinket, a locket. She never paid in full, but it was no great matter. As for Grieve, he was a nuisance, nothing more. I had no reason to kill him. Poirot studied him, noting the absence of the blue thread in his wardrobe. Very well, monsieur. Your part in this drama, it seems, was peripheral. Finally, Poirot sought out Father Benedict at the church, finding him in the chapel, kneeling in prayer. The priest rose, his face haggard. Monsieur le Curé, Poirot said, Samuel Cole has confessed. But you hid a secret. The funds, the disagreement with Grieve. What was it you feared? Father Benedict's shoulders slumped, his voice a whisper. A small debt, Mr. Poirot. I borrowed from the church funds to help a parishioner, meant to repay it. Grieve found out, threatened to expose me. I was ashamed, but I didn't kill him. Poirot nodded, satisfied. Your secret is safe, Father, for it is not the heart of this crime. As they left the church, Hastings looked at Poirot, his brow furrowed. It's over, then? Samuel's our man, and the case is solved, except for that blasted key. Poirot's eyes twinkled in the moonlight. Almost, Hastings. The key, it is a whisper of another truth, one we may yet uncover, but for now, the Crimson Bell's silence has been explained, and justice, it will be served. The tower loomed above, its silence no longer a mystery, but a testament to a brother's revenge. Poirot's mind, however, lingered on the key, its purpose still hidden, a final challenge in the dance of truth. Chapter 12. The bell rings again. The village of St. Aldwyn's awoke to a new dawn, the first rays of sunlight piercing the morning mist and gilding the ancient stones of St. Mary's Church. For the first time since Thomas Grieve's murder, the crimson bell rang out, its deep resonant chime rolling across the hills, a sound both mournful and restorative. The village, shaken by the revelation of Samuel Cole's crime, seemed to exhale, the familiar toll marking a return to order. yet carrying the weight of the tragedy that had silenced it. Hercule Poirot stood on the steps of Mrs. Whitby's manor, his Homburg hat tilted against the early light, his gloved hands resting on his walking stick as he listened to the bell's voice. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Captain Hastings, who stood beside him, his face softened by the sound. "The crimson bell speaks once more. It is as if the soul of Saint Aldwyn's has been restored, yet it reminds us of the darkness that passed here. Samuel Cole's confession has solved the murder, but the heart of man, it remains a mystery, none." Hastings nodded, his notebook tucked under his arm, his thoughts still lingering on the events of the previous day. "It's a grim business, Poirot. Samuel's revenge, Margaret's pain, the priest's shame, Vance's secrets, all tied to that one man, Grieve. But you did it, old chap. You pieced it together, the footprint, the nail, the thread, the cloth. Though I confess that key still bothers me. What was it for?" Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint enigmatic smile. "The key, Hastings. It is the final note in this symphony of crime, one we have yet to play. Let us walk, and perhaps the village will offer its last secret." They strolled toward the church, the bell's chime fading into a gentle echo as the new bell-ringer, a young man appointed to replace Grieve, completed his task. The village was stirring, its inhabitants moving with a cautious relief, their whispers now of justice rather than fear. Poirot's mind, however, was not at rest. The rusted key found in the tower's wooden box had not been explained by Samuel's confession. It was too small for the church doors, too ornate for a common lock, and its presence suggested a hidden purpose, a secret Grieve had kept or one the killer had overlooked. At the church gate they met Mr. Dobbs the sexton, who was sweeping leaves from the path. His weathered face brightened at the sound of the bell, but his eyes held a trace of unease. "Good to hear it ring again, Mr. Poirot," he said, leaning on his broom. "Feels like the village can breathe now that Samuel's been caught." Poirot inclined his head, his eyes sharp. "Indeed, Monsieur Dobbs. The crimson bell has reclaimed its voice, thanks to you and the new ringer. But tell me, this key—" He produced the small, ornate object from his pocket, holding it up to catch the light. "Have you ever seen its like in the church? Perhaps for a box or a cupboard Grieve used?" Dobbs squinted at the key, his brow furrowing. "Can't say I have, sir. Grieve kept his things in the vestry mostly. Tools, a few papers. But there's an old chest in the crypt, locked tight for years. Never saw Grieve open it, but he was particular about the crypt, always checking it was secure." Poirot's eyes gleamed with sudden interest. "A chest, you say? In the crypt? Take us there, if you please." Dobbs led them into the church, through the nave and down a narrow stone staircase to the crypt, a cool, shadowed chamber beneath the altar. The air was damp, the walls lined with ancient stone slabs inscribed with faded names. In a corner, half hidden by cobwebs, stood a small iron-bound chest, its lock rusted but intact. Poirot knelt, his magnifying glass in hand, and tested the key. It turned with a faint click, and the lid creaked open, revealing a bundle of yellowed letters tied with string, a small ledger, and a silver locket. "Voilà," Poirot murmured, his voice tinged with triumph. The secret Grieve kept, hidden even from his killer. Hastings peered over his shoulder, his curiosity piqued. "Letters? A ledger? What's it all mean, Poirot?" Poirot carefully untied the bundle, scanning the letters. These are from years ago, Hastings, written by Grieve to a woman, Ellen Harrow, the innkeeper's sister. Love letters, it seems, but unrequited. The ledger records small sums, payments to her, perhaps to aid her after she left the village in disgrace. The locket, it bears her initials. He paused, his mind piecing together the final thread. Grieve. He was no saint. His accusations against Samuel and Margaret Cole were not without cause, but they were harsh, driven perhaps by his own bitterness. This locket, it connects to Margaret's debt to Vance. She mentioned a trinket, a locket she never fully paid for. Grieve, I suspect, knew of this and kept these items as a reminder of his own role in the village's pain. Hastings' eyes widened. So Grieve was tangled up in all their lives, Samuel, Margaret, even Vance. But why keep this hidden? Poirot rose, dusting his gloves. Guilt, Hastings, or control. Grieve held power over others with his accusations, but these letters, this ledger, they were his own secret, a confession of his heart. Samuel did not know of the key, or he might have taken it. The chest, it was Grieve's private burden. They returned to the manor where Poirot shared his findings with Mrs. Whitby, who confirmed Ellen Harrow's story. A woman shunned after a scandal, aided by Grieve's money but never reconciled with the village. The locket, she recalled, had been sold to Margaret by Vance, a transaction that had sparked their dispute. As evening fell, Poirot stood with Hastings on the manor's terrace, the crimson bells tower a dark silhouette against the sunset. "The case, it is closed, Hastings," he said softly. Samuel Cole's revenge silenced the bell, but the key has spoken of Grieve's own shadows. The human heart, it is a labyrinth of love, guilt, and vengeance. Hastings nodded, his face thoughtful. "You've done it again, Poirot. But it's a sad sort of victory, isn't it?" So much pain in one small village. Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his expression was solemn. "Oui, mon ami. Life, it is the greatest mystery of all, filled with secrets even the crimson bell cannot toll. But order, it is restored, and Poirot, he is content." They turned to leave Saint Aldwyn's the next morning, the bell ringing out once more, its chime a farewell to the detective whose little gray cells had brought light to the village's darkest hour. As the train carried them back to London, Poirot gazed out the window, his mind already seeking the next puzzle, the next truth hidden in the shadows of human nature.